And does this include elementary, middle, and high schools?
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you.
Just a note about that, Carol, you might talk about how the schools are selected because they don't go to all schools.
Yes, so they will not interview at all school sites. Because of COVID, they're going to only select 20, maybe 22 schools. The lead evaluator and I are going to have a meeting where we decide on what schools are selected. We're going to look at Title I status. We're going to look at their demographics. We're going to look at school grades, and we're going to make sure that we have a good sampling of schools across the district to represent us.
Tom?
Mrs. Brown mentioned that it would be advantageous to our strategic plan. Do you have any other thoughts about what other benefits that we can experience from this process?
You want me to?
Well, and as you know, high schools have to be accredited. So, that's one big benefit is that the high schools are not doing this all on their own and creating, it took a lot of time, these elaborate kind of details to try to make the accreditation team feel comfortable and at home and understand the really good things about us. So high schools must be accredited. And I know that St. John's has always been a district accredited school system, so we have to do it now.
And if I can answer some of that too. I know that I'm really looking forward to hearing what these 5 folks have to say, especially coming from Virginia and Kentucky, and then the 3 from around Florida, to find out what they think our successes and our challenges and where we might need to move forward. And I know one of the things they also look at least my experience has been that they've looked at the equity piece and our instructional materials and what's happening at each school and what we need to know in their eyes coming in from the outside and having a set of outside eyes looking in. Here's where we think you are as far as equity is concerned and what maybe you need to do. And so I know in St. John's, we always felt that was very important, and we did quite a bit of work on that. So I know they look at that, and there's a number of other things they look at that I know we're looking forward to see what they have to say about it.
Well, I think this is a great first step for us as we're looking to develop our strategic plan. In years past, a strategic plan was developed by the superintendent off somewhere on his own, and he'd bring it back and brought it to the board and the community, and they were like, whoa. And I think we want to have more community involvement, and I think some of that will come from this. Because I know as I've started thinking about what we want to do in our strategic plan, I'm like, well, there's so many things that we could be looking at, but I guess where do we need to focus and how do we go forward with that? And I think, we'll reach out to FSBA for some direction also on how to do that, because I think, I don't think we want to rush into a strategic plan. I mean, right now our plan is to do the best we can all across the board and let's move forward. But I think there's some that's going to need some specific attention, and we'll look at how we'll go about doing that. But I definitely want to include definitely our schools. I mean, I think they should be part of this, and all of our board members, and bring the community in too, because and I think this will help give us a roadmap. I think between this and the FSBA, I think this strategic plan is going to look a lot different than the ones in the past. And hopefully we'll get more buy-in.
Yes.
And we won't send the superintendent packing after he brings it to us, as has happened in the past.
One thing I can say is when they come and they review and they give us their ideas as far as what we need to be working on. One of the items is going to be the strategic plan, just for the fact that we don't have one. So it is one of those items they're going to check off in the negative category. I'm just telling you right now that it is. But when they supply their information and give us some feedback, that's really going to help us. And I agree, Ms. Brown, we need to include everyone from every area in our school district, parents, students, teachers, board members, everyone included in that strategic plan building so that we're all on the same page.
No other questions? Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I believe at, what, is it 10:30, we're going to have our lobbyist firm coming in?
We're getting on at 10 o'clock. Megan's.
I can't hear you.
Now.
10 o'clock,
10 o'clock, yeah.
What time is it now? Oh, 10
15
to.
minutes.
We have about 15 minutes.
Well, so maybe we can talk amongst ourselves about the plan. Dr. Brennan, maybe you would want to lead us in where we're going?
Sure, certainly. Thank you. Vern Crawford, when they do come on board with us, Vern Crawford is going to facilitate this for us. Megan Fay is also going to be with us, and so will Ron LaFace. And I know we talked a couple of times this past week. And, you know, in talking what our platform should look like in Sarasota, there were a few items here, and I think you have this latest, you should have this list. And the first one there, enhance state investment in quality early learning and VPK programs by providing more robust funding, raising the qualifications of instructional personnel, improving the quality of the curriculum, and establishing uniform high-quality early childhood indicators. So one thing, you know, if you look at the asterisk under that, need to gather information from the district about current barriers to joining the VPK program, take advantage of the current available funding of around $2,500 per student. You know, if I can just mention my experience a little bit on this area, and first of all, what I want to say is, I truly believe we need to grow our VPK program, our early childhood program, as much as possible, starting, you know, obviously with pre-K. I think the more students we're able to bring in and have our teachers teaching them will help them quite a bit, especially as we move forward to the third grade, and the fact that we need to make sure that they are all reading proficiently. You know, part of my experience is there's been a few different buckets of money that we would be able to use, or funding to be able to use already, that I'm not sure that we're using, and that's something that I'm going to be looking into to find out where we are, what the barriers are, why we haven't, what we're doing, that kind of thing, as we move forward. Yes, VPK allows for $2,500 per student and is for 3 hours a day, 3 hours a day. But if we were also to include Head Start and possibly some of our Title I money, we need to look at that as well. And then our ESE students, if we have ESE students involved in our early childhood program, our pre-K program, again, my experience is that we would have around 14 students that would be able to pay for a teacher if they were ESE students. So for every 14 students, we'd be able to pay for a teacher, because that funding comes in around $7,500 per student up to $12,000 per student. And there's some students who could take advantage of all three buckets: the Head Start bucket funding, the VPK funding, and the ESE funding. And when you have that scenario, you then have enough money to have a really robust, nice program. And so I think we really need to look at that and see where we are and where we need to go with some of that, and request that funding if we do move in that direction.
And this is a statewide ask. Yeah.
This is what I just described is what my experience has been. I don't know if all.
So you want to look at seeing what we're doing inside,
Right.
but also reach out to the state.
Right.
The first item on my list is the Summer Learning Academy. Are we not asking for that? I mean, I know
Yeah,
it's kind of a big ask.
So that one, let me see, where is that one?
It was the top of our list that I'm looking at.
Oh, this was a revised list that came from Vern.
This is revised from what I saw last week, because I see the workforce education.
Yeah.
But you don't have the first one being seek a state appropriation to the Summer Learning Academy is your first bullet?
Yeah, let me see.
Well, you know, let's talk about it. I mean, I don't know in this time if we can even expect that.
Yeah,
But at the same time, I mean, the head of the Education Senate is Joe Gruters.
Right.
You know, he may have some pull that we'd be able to get that. We're also targeting kids who have a summer slide, and they're and rather than giving us money for the summer school, this is a specific program, it might go along with what the governor's been asking
Yeah,
for.
when Ron comes on, he'll be able to explain this a little bit better. One of the things he told me about that particular one was you might want to postpone this to another time and look, because we're going to be looking at closing that achievement gap from the COVID slide.
Right.
And then possibly using, especially if we have more CARES money, to utilize that to help us with our reading program in the summer. And so I think what he was saying there was most of the districts in the state are going to be asking for, I don't know what you call it, but funding that would help us with the COVID slide and catching people up from this whole year. And I know he can speak to it better than I, but that's where he was coming from on that.
Yeah, well, yeah, I too was wondering, should we even be asking for this in this year?
And
Okay.
he doesn't think so. He thinks we should postpone it this year. But again, I can have him speak to that at 10 o'clock when he comes on.
Yeah. Jane, do you have a comment on that?
I do. Our pre-K program, which I've been very involved with at Goshio, is play-based, as I really feel if you have 4-year-olds at a full-day program, which I'm in favor of, it should be play-based. But those issues with Head Start and ESE, we haven't looked at, Dr. Asplin, and I think we really should. As I was told, and maybe Dr. Kingsley has more input for me on this item, but when I was asked why we didn't ask for the $2,437 that now I think was expanded maybe a tiny bit last year, it was like there's too many strings attached, it's too much trouble for our teachers. Well, who's making that decision? Are we making that decision, or are we having teachers make that decision? I don't know. But we were talking about 2 classes, so
Yeah.
we understand that. But I think that's gigantic, and I agree with you. I think we need to look at this more globally. We know that it may not be the year to do this, but I know we have much more emphasis in the Early Learning Coalition in Tallahassee now, and I spoke to some people in that regard last year when I was in Tallahassee, but it went nowhere. So I really think that looking at the SLA program, the summer learning, and the fact that that would help us with summer slide in a big way, affecting COVID as well, probably is a better bang for our buck. I think we're going to have to be careful this year about what we ask for because of the situation with money, but also because, we don't know what's going to happen. We're not going to be able to go to Tallahassee and lobby as we did before. There'll be a place set up for you to give testimony for a certain meeting. You'll be tested. You'll have some very constrained situations. So I'm not at all sure. In talking to some lobbyists from Miami and other places and talking to Ron, I'm not at all sure we'll all be doing what we normally do day in the legislature this year. So I think we have to be cautious as to what we ask for, because there's not going to be a lot on the table.
The other part of the Summer Learning Academy is training the parents. But I would think perhaps in the CARES funding, there's also funding for training, retraining, or there's other areas out there where they'll train people to go from public assistance to on their own, that we might try to find other dollars to help train these parents, because we've already got the program set up.
Yes.
It's the funding that we're looking for, and I think, COVID might give us more options to try to find those dollars.
No, I agree. And I think, when we talk about closing the achievement gap, and I know you've heard me say this before, but I think, obviously it really, really starts in that pre-K time. When you can close that gap and start off as close as you can, and then as our teachers, who wonderful as they are, move all of our students forward, everybody's moving forward, but the gap is still closed. When it's already that big, and our teachers are doing a great job, and they're moving everybody forward. Everybody's getting better, but the gap's still there. And so closing it as early as you can in that pre-K, first grade time frame needs to happen. And I think it definitely needs to be part of our strategic plan. We need to figure out what the program is that we want to have, and then figure out how we're going to fund that.
Well, and that equity coordinator that we're looking at should help us, because, any of you else who listened to that one General Assembly program with the FSBA, it talked about, we've got to raise our expectations for these kids.
Yeah.
We can't just keep thinking, oh, they can't do that because they come from a, they don't have the financial resources, their parents don't, we need to raise the expectations for these kids.
Yeah.
And we need to have every teacher buy into it, that yes, these kids can perform.
Yeah.
I thought that was a very good presentation that we had. Karen?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that with the Summer Learning Academies that we are looking at CARES dollars, and we're not necessarily looking at eliminating SLA as much as how we use those CARES dollars.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right, we're not trying to eliminate any of our programs. We're actually trying to grow our programs.
Okay.
It's just how do we pay for them?
And in addition to that, I just want to reinforce the pre-K piece, having been in elementary school as a teacher for 12 plus years. You see the gap in the first couple weeks of kindergarten. It's obvious, and you are trying to close it forever versus really getting ahead of that would be a great priority in our strategic plan. Thank you.
Are they signing in yet, or is my watch a little fast?
Okay, thank you.
I think the next item on here also may tie into this, because we're talking about increasing the funding for workforce education at our technical college, and rather than having it on what today's enrollment is, as we do per FTE for our schools, they do a 3-year rolling average, and with us expanding STC to Northport, it's not as bad as it was before when we first opened it, but I mean, we're still adding programs, and we want to be having the accurate count.
Yeah.
And I understand the appropriations chair in the Senate this year, they had an issue with this funding last year, so he may have a better understanding or a better input on wanting it corrected. Vern is on?
Vern is on? Mr. Crawford, are you with us?
I am. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for being here this morning with us. I know that Megan and Ron are going to join you as well. And I told the board this morning that you would be facilitating this process for us. And we just started some preliminary conversations just to talk through some of these. So if you would, we'd love for you to go ahead and begin. Thank you.
Okay, I know that Ron and Megan, Megan's actually, I think, got the PowerPoint, but hopefully you have a copy, and I see Megan right there. Hopefully you've got a copy of the
Yes.
The latest and the greatest, which was worked on over the weekend, that really stressed the increased focus on both, as you were talking. I came in when you're talking about the post-secondary vocational programs and career ed stuff. So we do have some issues we're going to try to deal with that. Megan, I see you. Is Ron going to be joining us?
Ron should be on momentarily. Can you hear me fine?
Mm-hmm.
We can hear you well.
Wonderful. And I will share my screen with the latest and greatest document when we are ready to start. So just let me know.
Okay. Well,
We have a copy in front of us,
Perfect.
but you can
The
share it for
superintendent
the
has to
public
be-
at large.
Dr. Asplin, you want us to go ahead and begin?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I know time is valuable here. When Ron does come on, I'd like to pause, if I may, though, so that he can sort of give you a review of where we are with Tallahassee and all the interesting things that are going on and some things that are not going on at this point, and that sort of thing. But on the legislative program itself, the proposals that are before you have come from input from the board members, from you and your staff. They've come from looking at the Florida School Boards Association activities. Of course, the district is involved with the Greater Florida Consortium that Ms. Goodwin is also president of. And we looked at those issues as well as things going on locally, the local business community, Suncoast, and the issues on Sarasota College, which I think tie in with the funding issue that I think I heard you finish completing. So hopefully we've been able to get a good deal of feedback and input. I do want to stress these are beginning preliminary recommendations. Many of you have heard me say this before, and I'll say it again. There will be issues come March 2 that we haven't even thought of. So this, at this point, is going to be a fluid document. It is a living, breathing document, but based on certainly the knowledge and experience that Ron and Megan have had, this is our suggested starting point as we go into the new year. Ron, I do see you there. Dr. Esplin asked us to sort of begin talking about the program, but let me sort of defer for a moment. And if you would maybe lay some of the groundwork that we have, sort of the background as to what we're looking at or potentially facing for the coming year.
Sure. Thank you, Vern. And I appreciate you getting started. And I'll be very quick just to kind of set the stage, and then we'll go into these items. First, let me let you know how excited we are to begin working on this legislative platform workshop. And really, we're excited because we're, for the first time, actually talking about the future and planning for it, and not just reacting to what is happening on any given day. But our plan is to just provide some overall comments about what we think the 2021 session will look like at this point, and then Vern's going to facilitate some board discussion on these items that have been raised by board members and the district for consideration, and in some discussions that Megan, Vern, and I have had individually with board members. Usually at this point in the year, we've already kind of completed this exercise, but with the elections and COVID response, everything's been delayed as goes to planning, but now is the right time to begin this process. So next session, what do we think it's going to look like at this point? It's certainly going to be budget and COVID focused. Both the Speaker and the Senate President have cautioned all of the lobbyists in Tallahassee not to bring non-COVID related policy to the legislature this year. They just don't believe they're going to have the bandwidth or the time to deal with it. And even with the state revenues improving month after month, the state will be cutting and readjusting next year's budget from what it's traditionally looked like. What that means is healthcare and education account for most of the discretionary spending in the state budget, so they will be the focus. The Speaker does not want to cut K through 12 education. He has made that clear, and that's going to be one of his pillars that he's going to focus on. But certainly the Senate President has indicated that he is interested in looking at how Florida funded K through 12 during the last recession in the late 2000s as kind of a starting point for discussions. Both the Speaker and the Senate President are looking to make some cuts to education and shift some of these cuts to tuition increases. Tuition in the state of Florida has not been increased since before 2013 under Governor Scott and under Governor DeSantis. So in bad budget times, they're certainly looking at that direction. And they're also looking at some new potential revenue streams to the state. In years past, for example, Florida does not require the collection of online sales tax. We're one of the few states that still does not require that, even though it is a sales tax that is due. It's just voluntary at the moment. But this year, with the budget situation that's actually on the table to require mandatory collection of online sales tax, and certainly a gaming compact, which we always kind of call Sally in the football. Every year we get something moving right towards the end of session and then it falls apart. There is a very strong possibility that we could get a Seminole gaming compact, which could result in anywhere from a couple $100 million to the state a year to even more than that, depending on the scope and breadth of it. The protocols for next session are unknown at this time. We do expect it to continue to be a restricted access to the Capitol. With a lot of COVID protocols in place. It'll certainly depend on what the positivity rates are when we get into January, February, and certainly March, about how much access people are going to have to committee meetings, meeting with members and the like. But we do, just for planning purposes, anticipate that there will not be any days on the Hill as we've traditionally had, whether it's, the School Board Association Day on the Hill or different county delegations. The leadership is already cautioning against anybody making any plans for that, and most entities have just decided to take this year off. But that is going to be developing. As we know more, we will certainly be sharing that information. And so I hope that overview was a little bit just to help you get a mindset for what we expect, and certainly a lot of the items that have come up for discussion before the board are in line with what we believe the session will look like. And so with that, Vern, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. Let me ask if the superintendent board have any questions on your commentary.
Questions?
We're all set. We're ready to
Okay.
listen.
The one addendum that I would add to that, in this particular program, you will notice we do not address funding for COVID-related matters specifically. I know that Ron has cautioned all of us that this may be something which will come up in the session, but right now, obviously, we're focused to see what Washington does. If there is a partial relief act that passes that they're talking about, of course, the federal budget itself expires on Thursday, so we're expecting that either they will continue the resolution or they'll actually pass a budget for this next year. There is some money in that that proposed compromise package for education. We're not quite sure exactly how much, and more importantly, we don't know exactly how it would flow to states or to school districts. But that will have a pretty much of a direct bearing in terms of what the needs might be at the state level. And I would expect that certainly as COVID issues, if they do arise, as being a significant cost factor for the district, that working with this will get this added to our legislative program down the road. The program is divided into a two-tier format, and we've done this for the past several years to try to focus on what are those things that are really critically important to Sarasota, and then those issues that are important, but they're more of a state or regional basis in terms that we would lend support. And the 4 items that we have at this point as our working draft for submission and for your consideration today under the Sarasota priorities are really taking the issue of early childhood education. This has been on the front burner for the past 3 or 4 years. We firmly expect that it will continue to be on the front burner, especially on the House, as far as trying to improve partly the funding, but more likely the qualifications for instructional personnel and the quality of the program. I think, as you're aware, the issue of school readiness assessment is still being looked at, and the department is working on that at this point. But this has been an issue that we want to continue to work on. We are looking to still get some additional information from the district in terms of some barriers that we have here locally on voluntary pre-K, and then to make sure that we do take full advantage of the funding on a per pupil basis, which was increased a little bit for the first time in almost 2 decades for pre-K at the $2,486 level. So this is one item that we are suggesting that we do have as a priority for this coming year. The second issue
Well, Vern,
is
on
yes,
that point of the pre-K, we found we had a large loss in expected numbers on kindergarten, and I think if we can bring more into pre-K, we've got a closer flow of those kids coming in if anything like this comes up again, because if they've already here on pre-K, they're more likely to join us for kindergarten when the time comes. You know, there were several hundred students that we expected that didn't show up. And maybe they stayed in pre-K an extra year. And so I would think this pre-K, getting them into our schools, would be very, very important to us.
Well, and I would agree with that. And Vern, if I can just say one thing, you know, when we are trying to, let's say, market for those students, try to find out who they are, where they are, how we're going to get to them, how do we communicate with the parents and talk to the parents. And a lot of that is time and one-on-ones and trying to get parents to understand that it'd be great for their student to come in and be in a classroom with our teachers. Do you know, is there money for that sort of thing, the marketing part of it?
Not per se, Ron. I don't really think that that's been pretty much left up to providers, whether they be public providers or private providers.
Okay.
And I know too, I happen to know somebody rather close who teaches kindergarten, and she understands there is a real big divide on how well prepared these kids come to school, where some of them can't even write their name or even their initials, and whereas other kids come, they're reading and they can add numbers already. So there's this big, I mean, if we could at least get kids coming to school knowing their ABCs or knowing how to print their own name, there's a big gap in the readiness that we get. And, you know, if we could get the kids that at least come in on level or somewhere close to level, it would really make it a lot easier for us to get them to level by third grade. And so I think this pre-K is very, very important. Don't you have more pre-K at your school? I'm sorry, at your school. St. John's. Didn't St. John's, really focus on pre-K?
We did, and we were able to really look at a lot of things and increase it over a couple of years from around 200 to we were at 800 last year. And it was just really, like I said, going out, banging on doors, talking to pediatricians, talking to parents, and then growing the program, but having the money to do that because you have to have teachers, you have to have classrooms, you're running buses, all those things. So, so yes, it's possible. It's costly. It really is costly. And then trying to predict that in a crystal ball.
Oh, and then we'd have to provide transportation.
Well,
because normally now when you take a child to pre-K, mom
right.
drives.
I believe, and Vern, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe our ESE students, we have to transport them, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Head Start, which is more of your poverty students, we don't have to transport, which is ironic. Is that right?
Nope.
That's right. So it is ironic, isn't it? That's the way it's set up, but that's the way it is. And so the more ESE students that we have coming in, I think really helps those students. And then also the funding that comes along with them is good, but then we do need to transport them. And one other question that I have, Vern, is there any talk on, I think right now our pre-K assessments are through Flickrs, or it has been. What is the talk as far as what assessment it is that they might use in the future?
I'm going to let Ron answer that because I know he's been working with the Department of Education. That's one of the key things that did not happen last legislative session. And I believe that DOE is actually looking at coming up with its own revised assessments. Ron?
Yeah, we can expect the continuation of Flickrs as it exists today for the coming future. Pre-K readiness is a major initiative that has the governor's buy-in. He issued an executive order on it last year, and the department has been looking at ways to improve it, not only as was mentioned about making sure that students who go through VPK are kindergarten ready, but also tracking them from K through 3 in progress monitoring. So I think you're going to almost see an expansion of the Flickrs exam through other grades where they're using STAR readiness as the assessment base. In order to make sure that you're able to drill down more on data, whether it's district-run VPK programs versus private provider VPK programs, and how each private provider is actually doing. They've been looking at the Flickrs rollout. It's been operational for, I think, about 2 or 3 years, and just now the state is deciding that it's got enough of a baseline to really start to press this issue and improve the readiness of kindergartners. So now would be the time to start looking at some of the things that were just discussed. As Dr. Asplin mentioned about, talking to pediatricians, or encouraging students to join before kindergarten these programs, because the accountability is going to be increased in the near future. And then one of the other issues, that I know that we've discussed for a year or two is our VPK program, I don't believe qualifies for state funding because of the way that we have it designed. So that's always something that we can continue to get some more information about and see if there's ways that we can improve that to enhance the funding.
All right, thank you. I know one of our board members, Ms. Ziegler, she is on the line remotely, and I know she has a question. So Ms. Ziegler.
Hello there, everyone, and thank you for the update. I know one of the things you had highlighted, Ron, was just the emphasis on the financial challenges that await us this session. And I know I was with the speaker last week, and that was reiterated, but with the emphasis of priority on education, certainly healthcare. My question is, as we talk about both the VPK, even SLA, and I know that may be sidebarred, but early education sounds like I certainly agree and believe that my fellow board members know how important that is. is really more our strategy of how we articulate this to the legislatures, particularly with the disruption from COVID. And the same would be the case, I would think, and I don't want to jump ahead, but I don't want to keep interrupting because I'm remote, but would be on the workforce development or CTE programs. And again, if you look at the economic disruption that has transpired, especially with COVID, how we really can just align an appropriate narrative as to how that would provide a financial impact to not only a benefit to our state, to our region, and then even from an education standpoint.
Yeah, and those are all great points, Ms. Ziegler, and they're absolutely kind of where we take this document after we finish today. Kind of the plan that we were working on is that once we get a sense of the issues that you all are interested in as a collegial body, then we will weave that strategy into a narrative that ties all of these pieces together. I mean, certainly I would like it to be VPK through workforce education. And we've got items in each of these that we can work on. And I mean, I know that we kind of jumped ahead to the next bullet, or I'm going to jump ahead since you mentioned it. But the, I mean, for example, on the 3-year rolling average of workforce education, that's an issue that we have had at Sarasota because we are growing that, and we get, it doesn't reward districts with growth. You only get your growth 3 years after you've actually kind of funded it yourself. And Megan and I've actually already begun discussions with the new Senate Education Appropriations Chairman on that, because I know that that's an issue that he has, technical college in his district that also is aligned with. And so we will put all of these pieces together and have that narrative that you mentioned, so it flows very well. I will say what we do not have on this item, and you mentioned it, was the summer learning academies. That is something that we have focused on in years past, received appropriations, but as I understand it, because of COVID, at least last summer and possibly this upcoming summer, the focus has shifted temporarily from, combating the summer brain drain to, frankly, really focusing on the widening achievement gaps that's happening to all students because of COVID. And we have received CARES funding for that. So it wasn't something that we've included on this document because we kind of see this last summer and the upcoming summer as a different focus, and then possibly pick up the summer learning academies on the summer after. But if that's something that you would like us to continue to try to accomplish some state funding, and we're interested in continuing that same traditional program this summer, in addition to our achievement gap focus, and that's something that we can certainly revisit and add onto it. But to your point, all of these items, once we get a complete document of things you want us to focus on, will be put together into a single narrative, and it will make sense to legislators of how we're focusing on students from VPK through K through 12, and also, workforce education, all of the things that we're focused on for our students.
Perfect. And just as a follow-up on the SLA, and I'll defer to my fellow board members as well, I know it's something we've championed for many years and had some success with some appropriations. But again, almost from a strategy standpoint and understanding the temperature of the legislature not being greedy. And so I don't want to, I give the idea that we're technically putting it off the table because SLA is such a priority. But, and again, maybe that's a conversation for the board of the early education piece is key, whether it be VPK, and then, the summer learning academies, I know is a little bit different, but we certainly addressed that with the earlier grades. So, but I would agree that I would have hesitation to add that if they are just going to look at it and say, not this year.
Bridget, we were looking at that summer learning and especially in this year to be asking for an ask specific for the district. I don't know that that's even going to be possible this year. But maybe with your connections, you know better. But I'm thinking that, they would not be looking too fondly on any things like this, but we are looking for CARES funding, not only for closing the achievement gap, because those dollars are out there, and that's a statewide issue, is closing that achievement gap. So we do want to help that, not just our district, but statewide, and also looking for CARES dollars to pick up the training part that we have for the parents that are in the program. because I think that they're out there now for training for employees that no longer have jobs or want to go through a better job. So we're looking at those areas that may be coming down from what we've got already or what might be coming down. So we're thinking we can reach out to those two areas to help us fund that program. We still want to do what we did with Summer Learning Academy, but look for other places for the funding this year.
No, I would agree with that.
And
Moving on.
The 3-year rolling average, I don't know if anybody else needs any explanation on that. That was the second item. We didn't get to that yet. You don't have the list that we have, probably, Bridget. But was there anything else we needed to talk about, Ron, regarding that workforce education, or does our new board members understand what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, the way that they fund workforce education is they take a 3-year rolling average. And so how that works is that districts with growth really don't realize the funding for that growth until year 3. And so for, like I would say this year, Megan, correct me if I'm wrong, but Sarasota is getting funded at 84% of what we're doing with workforce education. So what we are working with the legislature on is a change in the funding formula so that districts that are experiencing growth are receiving those funds at the time of their growth, not sometime in the future, because the program does really, almost penalize you for growth. And it is something because, not every district has growth. That's been sort of hard depending on who's in the education appropriations chair spot. But like I mentioned, I think we've got some more possibilities there with Senator Broxson, just because he has some districts in his or some counties in his district that are in the same boat, and we've already raised this issue with him, and he's going to get his staff working on it, and we'll see if we can make some adjustments there to better receive funding based on how we're progressing in Sarasota.
Well, Mr. DePillo here in Sarasota will be happy to hear that.
Mm-hmm. And just to make a comment, kind of hearing the feedback, from Ms. Ziegler, we can always add a bullet in to kind of, because this is something that Ron and I will be working on and kind of in the room talking to members all session about, how to make sure we're maximizing funding for both COVID-related, expenses and, things like Summer Learning Academy, to make sure that, the district has every dollar possible to fund some of those initiatives. We can kind of add in a general bullet about, advocating to make sure that the district is maximizing funding opportunities, and that we make sure that we're lobbying both the DOE on any federal dollars that may flow through them as grant dollars, and certainly the legislature to make sure that, the district ends up with the most possible bang for your buck and the most possible dollars in your pocket during a bad budget year as we possibly can.
Okay.
All right.
You want to move on to bullet number 3?
Yes.
The issue of state assessment, I know that some of you have been following the State Board of Education, and certainly with the emergency orders that came out, and the executive order that came out last spring, which froze the use of FSA at that point. At this point, the Department of Education federally has the position that states are to continue their state assessments in conjunction with Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESEA. And that has been the plan with the commissioner. The testing schedule has already been announced. At the last state board meeting just before the holidays, before Thanksgiving, the commissioner did make the comment that he wants to see what the results are in the spring and sort of review them to see if, in fact, there needs to be any change or any hold made, but not to take any action right at this point. The recommendation before you really is sort of a consensus from among regional and some statewide organizations, but it's basically saying, yes, we would still do the assessment, but we would use those assessments as a baseline for accountability, noting that you've got the last ones that really counted were in 2019, and this would give the state and districts a really good view as to where exactly we are as it pertains to closing that achievement gap as we go along. But the caveat that is being recommended is that we would not use the assessments in terms of third grade promotion and, of course, calculations, graduation requirements, or the school letter or district letter grade review. Certainly, assessments can be used informally, but in terms as far as following the specific accountability requirements, that those would not be done for this current school year, which in effect is this coming spring.
I've heard on when I've been on talks with FSBA legislative committee, there were some districts that said, wait a minute, we have some schools that were Fs that we've improved. We want to be able to improve our letter grade. So I would like to say we won't change the letter grade if it goes down, but we'll change it if it goes up.
Ron, I know that I think Dr. Aspin, there's been a lot of talk and I believe the presentations with the commissioner, with the Superintendent's Association, where Commissioner Corcoran did at one point make the comment that one of the options that he might be thinking about would be to allow if a district or a school did go higher, that they would get credit for that and sort of hold others harmless. And I think that was a comment made back in September-ish, if I'm not mistaken. Ron, do you have anything further on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can work on the wording to make sure that it accomplishes that comment for sure, and that's kind of consistent with what the commissioner did with the spring FTE count. You know, he paid for growth but held everybody else pretty much harmless. And so, you know, they've certainly set the precedent there. And so, you know, I think that it's a good idea to make sure that if districts need to show improvement and they can show improvement, then we're certainly not advocating against that.
There's been some talk about why are you making us take these tests? Well, there is that we want to know if there's been growth or how the kids are falling back. But didn't I understand that the state pays for these tests whether we take them or not?
Yes, they didn't have a pandemic out clause in their assessment contract, but at the same time, I mean, that is you know, they certainly want to make sure that they are making use and getting the best picture out there of what's going on with students. I think that one of their biggest issues, I mean, not only that they do, you know, are under contract to administer an assessment, even though they've kind of repurposed the assessment tool and are providing some free progress monitoring using the test items with their vendor. But I also think that one of their biggest issues is school security, because they are or item security, because they are continuing the option for students, obviously, that want to be in remote learning, are, you know, afraid to come into the classroom, but they certainly cannot issue, you know, these assessments remotely. There needs to be security on the items and making sure that nobody is running off with the test questions or things like that. And that requires some students to come to school that are not coming to school now. So those are kind of the things that they're working through on it. But I do believe, as Vern mentions, at the end of the day, there will be an administration of it. How many students they require to take it who are currently remote learning is a question, and what they do with it is a question, but I would anticipate that it's just going to be informational at this time.
Yeah, and I would think with all the kids that are quarantined at any given time, how do you test those kids? If the test was supposed to be given on, you know, the second Tuesday of the month, and these kids are out for 2 weeks, so they'll have all those things to weigh in on.
You know, one other thing we need to take into consideration, and I don't know if the commissioner is thinking, I'm sure the commissioner is thinking about this too, but first of all, you know, given the test, I think everybody's okay with that. You know, you want to know how the students are doing. You want to know how the information helps to inform instruction so the teachers can move forward. The one thing that's been a struggle is, you know, are we going to count VAM or not? Are we going to count student performance in a teacher evaluation? And, you know, whenever you have an evaluation of any kind, you know, coming from the HR world, you want to let a person know a year ahead what their evaluation is going to look like. And you know, in August, September, you try to talk to all the teachers and say, here's what your evaluation is going to look like. And then not knowing what we're going to do with the test scores and the student performance piece, and it's kind of just hanging out there. It does make everyone anxious. So I'm wondering what he's going to do with that.
Karen?
We're hoping to get some direction on that as soon as possible. I think it's the next item that the commissioner's tackling. His last focus has up till now has been the spring FTE count, and now approving all of the district spring plans that are supposed to be delivered by the 15th. And then his next big issue that he's going to tackle is spring assessments.
One of our new members, Karen Rose, has a question.
Just more of a comment. We're including everything, and Dr. Asplin actually brought it up. I would like to see specifically teacher evaluation considered to include in what we're asking for. I think that if we're holding harmless third grade promotions and of course, et cetera, that I would like to see teacher evaluation included in that. And Dr. Asplin's already commented on the reasons why.
We can add that in.
Do you mean?
Anything further on that? We'll go on to the last priority that we have, which is anything and everything we can do to get teachers into the classroom. We've tried several things in past years. More recently was to try to allow people to come back early after retirement. Unfortunately, with the help of the Internal Revenue Service, we got the kibosh put on that one. And I know that we three are keenly aware, for example, that USF has announced they're shutting down their teacher college at this point. Hopefully, then maybe they'll reconsider. But there is a decline of people going into the profession. There's a growing interest, I believe, among legislators, or more recognition is the word I wanted to say. There's a growing recognition that this is an issue and is a problem. So the position that we have basically is to try to provide additional options, and the door is wide open for any option that can help us, whether it's the issues around certification, whether it is trying to find ways of scholarships to entice people to come into the profession, loan forgiveness, I'm going to say you name it. But at any rate, to try to do whatever we can to make the recruitment and the retention of instructional personnel there, and especially if we can, to try to still deal with the unemployment after retirement. Maybe something will change on that, but at this point, that's going to be a difficult one to try to get.
Well, what about if we narrow it to substitute teachers?
We had legislation, you may remember, that Representative Good had filed 2 years in a row to do that. That raised the issue, and we pretty well had the door closed on that. Part of it, and I hope, Ron, I'm not going out of bounds on this one, but there are still people in Tallahassee that remember the issues of what they felt was excessive payouts when people retired, and this was like 2009, 10, 11. And they're really, in a way, kind of afraid that if they start making exceptions, it's going to open the door. I don't know what the attitude or atmosphere might be for this coming session. Ron, Megan certainly have a better idea for that, but it is something that we can certainly still try to do. We had that in 2009. It was for substitute teachers, bus drivers, and I believe cafeteria personnel, if I'm not mistaken. That had been in there. So it'd be a question of trying to get that put back in.
Yeah, and the issue is not so much who is being reemployed in any form or fashion. The policy that really shuts this issue down is the IRS requires a bona fide separation from the district. And right now, Florida has determined that it's set, I guess about 10 years, the IRS sent Florida a letter and said, your current separation, your time before reemployment is not bona fide, and so it's jeopardizing the tax-exempt status of your pension fund. The legislature changed it to 6 months, and the IRS went away. So the question is whether there's any time frame below 6 months that would still be considered a bona fide separation from the state that wouldn't jeopardize the pension fund's tax-exempt status. The problem is the IRS won't tell you until you make the change. And so we actually have a proposal that Senator Gruters and Representative Good filed back in 2018 that would make the change to a shorter period of time for substitutes, bus drivers, and then sunset it in 1 year so that we could ask the IRS whether this proposal is okay or not. And if it wasn't, the law would go away unless the legislature reenacted it. So it wouldn't in our opinion, jeopardize the tax exempt status. But the legislature at the time did not even want to take the risk of doing this for 1 year to get a ruling and then it sunsetting. But we have new people in the legislature. We have new people in the committee chairmanship. So if this is something that we want to continue to look at, the specific reemployment aspect of this, outside of all of the other items that Vern mentioned of, certification and those issues, we can certainly check on getting that issue rolling again. Certainly with Senator Gruters being the chair of education, he's going to be looking at all sorts of education issues a little bit closer than he has possibly in the past when he was in charge of other committees. So it's something that we can certainly revive and give it a run to see what the temperature is in Tallahassee.
Well, also with that 6 month, that probably has wound down for a lot of the teachers who have retired, so and other staff members. So we might be able to look back at some of those who retired 6 months ago or longer to see if they'd be interested in coming back.
Yeah.
Karen?
Do we have any number of teachers retired on average that we're looking at, what the gain would be? Our average annual retirement of, are we talking, 10 teachers that might be able to substitute, 100? What are we looking at that we'd be advocating for over time to make this a worthwhile push?
Yeah, I don't know what the numbers are. I'd have to look. I have to find out.
Yeah, but we've had some that over time that have not been able to come back because of this.
Right.
Yeah.
Just one other comment on that.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to add, this would be a good time to kind of do that look at the number of employees this might affect, because what we were doing, what every school district was doing, and frankly every state agency up until, I guess, the beginning of 2020, was we were using third-party staffing agencies to basically run somebody retired. We'd move them into a staffing agency and then bring them right back to work. So there was a workaround that was actually endorsed by the state. State agencies were doing it, school districts were doing it. And so we were getting a lot of teachers back in the classroom. They were just being employed by temp staffing service A, within a week or two of retirement. But back in early 2020, the state's retirement plan came out with a legal opinion that said that was no longer allowed either. So this problem has really been exacerbated in 2020. And so, but the point of taking a look at how many retired teachers we have that may be willing to come back as a substitute if there was a process in place would be a good time to do it, because we no longer have that viable workaround.
Yeah. Okay. The only thing I was going to mention here, and then Ms. Ziegler has a question as well, but, especially during our current times, trying to retain and recruit teachers, I know spending time in HR, one of the things we were always looking at was, what are the obstacles that we have that are preventing some of our people and putting a bad taste in their mouth from coming on board? And, is it a district obstacle that we can change the way we've been doing things because it's been 20 years like doing the same thing and we need to make some changes? Or is it statutorily? And a lot of times you find that there's both. And so anything that we can maybe do statutorily, or look at our laws and our statutes to see if there is anything that can be changed or revised to help take away some of the obstacles for some of the folks who want to be teachers. I think it's a good time to really look at that whole area, just see what it is that we can change and revise, because I know we do it in districts, and it's just with our own rules, regulations, procedures, and maybe some of our laws need to be looked at to maybe just do things a little bit differently and take some obstacles out of the way. So just a thought. Ms. Ziegler?
Thank you. No, I couldn't agree more, both with what Karen said and also you, Brennan, as far as we probably need to assess the impact of this change. I think we currently want to figure out whatever roadblocks we can remove to maximize access for educators to come back in. And I know certainly retirees was one. I guess my question is to Ron and team. I am not as privy to IRS code and process and how that works, but my understanding that would likely be something that would be addressed at the federal level. And again, having to assess the bang for our buck, if you will, if that were to be amended in any way or any kind of safeguards, because putting the pension at risk is a substantial risk factor. So I understand that's where it's come, but has that been something that's been considered? If need be, do we go not just the state legislature, but is that something a congressional amendment would make any difference to the IRS code?
It certainly could, if there were the will to dig into something, kind of this granular at the congressional level. The way that the state has always viewed these is they do feel that they get responses on laws that are on the books from the IRS as to whether they're good or bad. They just don't get any feedback they don't get any feedback in the abstract. They don't get any feedback for philosophical or theoretical questions. And so that's really the issue is there a will at the state level to kind of make this a real issue under a way that has almost zero risk to the state? But there is 0.00001% risk whenever you make a law, even if it's sunsetted, that there is, some potential liability to the state. And it's just whether the legislature is willing to come up with some way to make it a real question to the IRS. But to your point, I mean, certainly if the congressional delegation, got involved and changed the law or put some sort of a federal standard over for schools, what is considered a bona fide separation, that would certainly solve the issue.
And I guess to that point, especially because I know this is not unique to Sarasota, and perhaps Jane, if this is something the FSBA would evaluate. I mean, I don't know that we've assessed the real impact if we were able to remove these risk factors and get all those pieces working in place where the legislature agrees, and then having a congressional delegation, but having that if we're wanting to champion that, I think we kind of have to have the data to support how beneficial this could be. Right now, I think we are almost working abstract, but I'd be curious from a state standpoint what that impact would be if there's been any kind of assessment or evaluation if that were to be changed.
Thank you. We'll go forward on that. And then we've got some regional and state priorities.
Right. These will be coinciding largely with what you have from some of the regional or state organizations. But again, based upon the feedback that we've had from the board members and staff and others, that these would be the ones that we are more keenly interested in, let's say, on behalf of Sarasota County. Number one, and these are not necessarily the top priority, but they're fairly close to it, increase of funding for mental health counseling. And this includes both the training, bringing in potentially additional guidance counselors. Senator Kathleen Pasadomo started the ball rolling on this 2 years ago, actually, before we had the Parkland tragedy. And it has remained to be a top priority, I think, on at least something that's on everyone's top priority list around the state, both as far as the funding is concerned and, again, the flexibility. And this is something we're recommending here. This is a pre-K through high school, or could well be post-secondary, but mainly pre-K through high school.
Thank you. Jane?
Yes, I think that in looking at what I've seen at other districts do, I'm not sure how we're handling this, but a lot of those mental health counselors are going out and looking for students. And I think that they could probably be utilized in a better way than that, but I do know that some districts are utilizing those, and I think we've had much more frontline support at the high school level, but not in our elementary grades, and we're finding now that we need much more help in elementary schools as well. So I think this is a very important issue, not only for mental health issues that we normally have, but because of COVID, I think this is an even greater emphasis.
Thank you. Next, the base student allocation.
The suggestion here at this point is the governor's budget obviously has not come out, and we won't know that until at the very latest, the beginning of February, which is when he's required to submit it. But the State Board of Education did act in September. I think we all recognize that revenues are apparently sufficient to get us through this current year. The big issue is next year, and that is a really, really big question mark at this point, not knowing what the impact of the pandemic is is going to continue to have on it. We did have a bit of really good news in the sense that the state sales tax collections in October actually slightly exceeded what had been projected pre-COVID. That was a good point. I try to not get too excited about that, but it does potentially give an indication that that roughly $3.5 billion projected shortfall next year may be eased. But nonetheless, even before COVID came out, the legislature and EDR, that's the Economic Demographic Research team, really has started projecting that revenues are going to begin leveling off for FY22. So what we're looking at here is, as a bare minimum, this really is to say, maintain, do not cut education spending, and at least maintain it at its current level, the token $10 per student allocation. Hopefully, as we get into the session, and usually it's around the third week of the session, which would be placing it toward the latter part of March, that's when the budgets at the local subcommittee level begin to sort of form, and there will be another revenue estimating conference, I would think, Ron, Megan, probably in April-ish, that will be the one that the conference committee uses, and I'm quite sure at that point probably we'll be able to refine further exactly what our needs are. And also, you'll have had a chance as a board and superintendent to start doing your workshops and go through what your projected needs are for next year. So in the meantime, right now, what we're simply saying is, please do not cut education, at least minimally maintain current level.
And I do think it's important to note here, this bullet and the fourth bullet are tied together in our view and really in the district's view as well. As you'll recall, last session or for this current budget year, we had a $40 per student BSA increase, but the Division of Retirement has been ticking up basically the employer contributions to the Florida retirement system over the past few years, because it's an actuarial issue, but frankly, the rate of return the state has been getting is much lower than what's estimated in the rates. And so the state has been having to escalate that tick up. And last year they escalated it by, I think, 2 basis points, which cost school districts about $230 million statewide, or to us, it was about $75 per student cost increase. So we got $40 per student BSA increase, but then we got a $75 per student cost increase. So it was really a net $35 cut at the end of the day is the way that it worked. We have the same thing facing us this year, about the same increase from the state retirement system in order to make sure that the rate of return is valid when it comes to their actuarial soundness. Now we can't be critical necessarily of the retirement system doing that, because we as a school district are a voluntary participant, which means that if the pension fund goes under, it's the school district that's actually liable for our employees. So we need to have a healthy Florida retirement system. But at the same time, the way that we talk about this to the state and what we're already beginning the conversations with is, just so you know, when you're looking at the BSA increase, just to maintain even level funding, when you put in the retirement system increase, is we need $75 per student base student allocation increase just to maintain. And anything below that is actually a cut because of the other cost increase. So want to make sure that everybody gets how those two things play into each other. And last session, it was something that was, because they're run out of different silos, the FEFP is in the Education Appropriations Committee, and the retirement system increase is in the Retirement GovOps Committee. They don't really connect each other until the very end. We are making sure that both silos know this issue up front and are accounting for it the best they can in their budget projections, so that the education appropriations folks know that if we don't hit $75 increase and we do the Florida retirement system increase, then the districts are actually going to be cut because of the increased cost.
I didn't understand that it went through GovOps, but it doesn't even go through the Education Appropriations Committee. It goes through GovOps.
Correct. They are two totally different silos, because the Florida retirement system, it hits all participants. It's police officers, cities. I mean, and so it's not targeted at education, but K through 12 school districts are one of the biggest voluntary groups out there. So when you look at all of the different entities outside of the state that it hits, we are by far the largest impact, just because we have so many participants in public schools, all our teacher and administrators that are members.
Ron, because this hits us so much, you know, that $75, I mean, we actually got a negative increase last year. That's I'm almost thinking that I would want to put that on page 1. I think, you know, that's I think a very, very important part of our funding, and has a, you know, that $75 per student hurt last year, and I don't know how the other board members feel, but and I think that the legislators don't understand that funding has to come from our BSA. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't think they know that, and I think that would be a way, you know, because if you put it on the bottom of the list, I don't know how many of them are going to, A, turn the page over, and B, look at that and understand it. I mean, because that's the important part, is that they need to understand that that's going through another committee, but those costs are coming back and affecting our FEFP. And I'd like to see it on page 1. How does anybody else agree to that, or?
I think it's very, very important. And Ron, you know, when you talk about police and fire and so forth, do they end up in the same situation where, as we are, as far as, you know, the FRS goes up and then they don't get as much money, or how does that work for them? Are they?
So they are in a similar situation as we are as far as the cost, but they are in a different situation from us in their ability to raise money.
Yeah.
To cover the cost,
right?
Because they're all local government entities, you know, that are funded locally, and they don't get their base increases as our local taxes go up to the state and then come back to us. So that is the real difference in ability to make it up, because to them, and frankly, to the state as well, because the state does this increased cost on themselves. I mean, they're not singling out school districts. It's every participant in each class is getting certain increases to get closer to the actual rate of investment return. And the state is covering their costs themselves. They pay for it. You know, they're not shifting it to employees. We're one of the only entities out there that it kind of comes out of any discretionary money we have, and we don't necessarily have the ability just to, you know, raise a fee or a tax to offset it because of the way that our money flows back to us through the state.
So the state doesn't feel it as much because it's in their state budget. Local governments set their own tax rates, but school districts, the tax rates are set for us, so we don't get a way to go back out and get that. Tom, you had a comment or a question?
Yes, I just agreed that I think it should go on the front page if we're the only ones, and to make it a local issue. But it would seem to me that there are other districts experiencing the same problem, and that we should try and find a way to make it more vocal than just coming from Sarasota. Do you have a suggestion about how to do that?
We are all working together on this issue, all of the school districts. I mean, personally, I think this is one of the bigger issues that we have facing us from a K through 12 standpoint, just because of the cost we had last year and the cost we had this year, and frankly, the amount of money that the legislature has available to offset that cost, that we need to focus on it as a state. And we've been already working on that. Politico did a deep dive article on this issue about a month ago, that we had some discussions with them and helped answer some questions to make sure that they understood it. So we're kind of actually coordinating, I would say, a number of districts that have connections through their local delegation of people in leadership to make sure that all silos and the leadership of both chambers understand the importance of this issue going into their funding decisions. Because frankly, the way the state budget works as it comes to school districts, they do what's called allocations and give each silo a certain amount of money to cover all of the items in their budget. And if a base student allocation big enough to cover this is not in the initial allocation, there's no way that you get the money to cover it. So it's a decision that's kind of made early on, and we need to, as all of the districts who have connections in leadership with their delegations need to be working on this, and we're already starting to coordinate them. So I do support the idea of putting it on the front page, because it is one of the most critical funding issues that we have, and it's not one that's readily apparent to everybody because it's from a different budget silo.
Jane, can you speak to?
Yes, it's certainly on the consortium, the Greater Florida Consortium. It's definitely on our priority list, and we'll have another meeting to discuss this list on Thursday. And we'll also have another meeting of the Legislative Committee of FSBA on Friday, and I plan to mention that because it is not on the list.
Yes, and I'm on that committee too, and I'll bring that up. Good point. But the third item has a way to help pay for this. You want to go into that, please?
Let me, before we do, let me just, as a wordsmither here, suggest we can bring that bulletin about the retirement and put that, if you like, as say the second bullet under mental health, and then amend the increase the base student allocation at the very end to where it talks about cover funding for enrollment growth, workload, and add in FRS costs as mentioned above. So we tie the two together.
Sounds good. I like that idea.
Okay. The third one is I've always called this the lifeblood of the FAFP. Sarasota County has the distinct honor of being among, I think it's about 13, 15 counties that are considered property rich, which means that throughout the formula history of the FAFP, counties that have a higher tax base value contribute more toward their local education system than they receive back from the state. As part of the equalization process and formula that has been in play since 1974. The base, the required effort is key because we've been able to take advantage up until 6 years ago, both with the reassessments, even with the Save Our Homes limitations that went as a constitutional amendment years ago, as well as new construction. 6 years ago, the legislature decided that they would freeze the value of required local effort, the dollar value, as part of a tax package for that particular year. A couple of years ago, they began to allow new construction growth to be able to be calculated as part of that required effort. But the value that is still missing is the reassessments, particularly where somebody moves, buys a house or an assessed or other property, and then we do not get the value of that. So the recommendation here has been to return, really to restore the calculation of the required local effort back to where it takes into account both your reassessments as well as new construction.
In the politics of this situation, just so everybody knows, is Speaker Sprouse is a proponent and a supporter of continuing to roll back the required local effort and not take advantage of property value increases outside of new construction. I will say there may be an opening to this issue on the Senate side, because with Senate President Simpson wanting to look at how we funded education back in the previous recession, sort of as a starting point for funding decisions, they certainly took full advantage of the entire RLE, or required local effort. So that could be something that gets it on the table, but ultimately, the House has not, under Speaker Sprouse, changed their view on this item. But I do think, since it's, it is, as Vern mentions, the lifeblood to the whole premise of the FEFP, where growth pays for growth, it's something that we need to continue to advocate for.
Right. And what, the state decided what they wanted to do on the tax, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, they wanted to hold all of us to the rollback rate, meaning what is the tax rate we have to have for our property this year so that we raise the same amount of taxes as we raised last year. Well, as property values go up, costs go up. I mean, rents go up, everything else goes up, our cost of employees goes up, and then new construction, we've got more students. So, capping the growth at 3% on current construction and then adding new construction, I mean, that's what pays for your services. I mean, you can't go to the rollback rate if in fact you're growing or prices are going up. So you need that increase to help fund your current costs. And, I guess that's, it's a difference in philosophy. Now, your tax roll will say what the rollback rate would have been versus what it is now. So if you're raising, even if you're lowering your tax rate, they still say you're raising taxes because you're raising your total dollar amount that you're raising this year is more than what it was last year. And so we get people that say that even though we've lowered their tax rate, that we're raising their taxes, but it's what their property values are going up. So we're saying at least give us the same tax rate you had last year, but let us evaluate all of the increases that we've had, new construction and that 3% or more that is happening on the other properties that are already on the tax rolls. Is that kind of it in a nutshell, or?
Yes.
Yeah, we want growth to pay. We want growth to pay for itself.
And Vern, do you have off the top of your head, since they instituted this policy 6 years ago, the loss in millage on the RLE? You remember what the rollback has cost the state?
I think on an annual basis, and I'm going to give you a range. It's been roughly between $200 to $400 million a year.
So that's the gravity of going to a rollback, $200 to $400 million a year compounded on itself with loss funding to go to education.
Yeah. So if they're looking for funding for education, there's $200 to $400 million. And
that covers your FRS cost.
Want to tell us what the layout of the session is this year, or any input you have? I know we've got some good news in that the chair of the Education Committee in the Senate is our own local senator, Joe Gruters, who knows us, and hopefully will help us with some of these issues, and hopefully we'll have an open door to his office, or he'll pick up the phone and call us back. Do you have any other insights on what we might have, or is there any closing comments any of the members might have on this?
Sure, real quick. So I'll give you a couple of more insights that I didn't cover up front. Certainly, you mentioned Chairman Gruters being the education chairman, which is, certainly puts us in the pole position of making sure that he understands everything that comes before his committee and how it impacts Sarasota District. Megan and I will be in his office probably every Monday and every Friday going through various things that he's going to be putting on his committee. On the House side, Chris Latvala is the education policy chair. He is from Pinellas, the same district as the Speaker Sprouse. They are very close. I would say Representative Latvala is a supporter of public education. So having him in that role is something that we also are very excited about. And certainly Speaker Sprouse has a very strong relationship with his Superintendent Grego in Pinellas, and they do have a lot of dialogue. Every time an education issue comes up, they're speaking about it, and Superintendent Grego is a very good advocate for all of the districts when he's having those discussions. So I am pleased with the way that, at least on the leadership side in the House and the Senate, it is shaping up for K through 12. On the House side, we do not have any of the subcommittees assigned or their chairmen yet, even in the appropriations or the subcommittees under the big education policy chair. So those will be announced soon, and we'll see more of a rollout of what we can expect. And we haven't really been getting any feedback yet on any items outside of COVID that we can other than the typical school board term limits bill has been filed, that we may or may not be seeing this session. But if it holds true to what the leadership is telling us as far as bringing non-COVID items, then I don't really expect a lot of issues outside of COVID, other than I do expect the VPK bill to be back, which includes some of the items that we've already talked about. Which is a priority of the governors and the departments. And we'll continue to work on that. But outside of those issues, a lot of this stuff is just happening, just like we're now talking about and doing some planning for our session, and we'll continue to keep you guys up to date as we hear things or see things start to move. Probably in early January is when things will really start happening.
Well, I was concerned when I heard that, the committee meetings are, delayed, and that there's, access to the legislative process is held back, that someone might try to use this to be pushing an agenda item. But what you've told me is that they want to keep them to COVID, and then that we have a friend in the Senate who's the Senate Education Chair, and then I don't know Representative Ladval. I knew his dad, but we have a friend, public education in the House, who talks with their representative and their superintendent. I think if we can keep those lines open in the House and the Senate, that there won't be any of the gotchas this year, hopefully, that we've sometimes seen in the past. But I think you've allayed some of my fears on that with your discussions today, and I appreciate that. Any other comments, questions, Dr. Asplin?
Just the only other thing was, so Vern or Ron or Megan, what's next at this point? Do you need anything else from us to continue to move forward as you put this together? Or have you heard what you need?
I think we have pretty clear direction from the feedback that we got today. So I'll add some of the issues that, I heard the school board members asked to be added. We'll move some of the bullets around to make sure we emphasize what the district or what the board said that the district's priorities should be, kind of more in order. And then I'll send it back so that the board can take a look at it. And then I believe it needs to come back at the next subsequent meeting for just an adoption if everyone is pleased with the format and all the content.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you very much.
Will one of you be at the delegation meeting, or in person or Zoom?
I will.
Okay, see you then. Oh, Jane?
Okay.
Well, that was what I was going to say. This is kind of like, this has to be it in terms of the delegation, because the delegation requirement is that our platform flow to them by Friday. And that is Will Robinson, who is the chair of the delegation, his intention. And then, of course, the meeting you all have is on the 18th.
And that's it. So then we will, no more comments either about this or other things. So we will, I appreciate you contacting us or coming in on this. And so we will adjourn, and we'll be back here tomorrow morning for our regular workshop, and in the afternoon for the meeting. And with that, Mr. Edwards moves we rise.
Thank you.